The whistle of a train pierced the quiet Montana afternoon as Charlotte Norwood stepped onto the wooden platform of Whiteridge Station, her gloved hand clutching a worn leather suitcase and her heart hammering against her ribs. She had traveled nearly 1,000 miles to marry a man she'd never met, leaving behind the whispers and stares that had followed her since the fire that changed her life forever. The year was 1876, and for Charlotte, the vast expanse of the Montana Territory represented both an escape and a last chance at happiness. She adjusted the high collar of her dress and made certain the right side of her face remained partially hidden behind the curtain of her chestnut hair. The scars that ran from her temple to her jaw had been her constant companions for 5 years now, ever since that terrible night when she'd pulled her younger brother from their burning home. "Miss Norwood." A woman's voice called out, and Charlotte turned to see a plump, gray-haired lady waving a handkerchief. "I'm Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife. I've come to escort you to your lodgings before the wedding." Charlotte nodded politely. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Holloway." As they walked through the dusty streets of Whiteridge, Charlotte tried to ignore the curious glances from townsfolk. Mrs. Holloway chattered amiably about the town, its people, and most importantly, about Robert Sawyer, the rancher who had advertised for a bride in the eastern newspapers. "Mr. Sawyer is a good man," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. "Owns the largest cattle ranch in the county. Built it up from nothing after coming west 10 years ago. He's a bit rough around the edges, perhaps, but honest and hardworking." Charlotte only half listened, wondering what this stranger might think when he saw her face. His letters had been straightforward but kind, describing his ranch and his need for a wife to help manage the household. She had been truthful in her responses, but deliberately vague about her appearance. "The wedding is set for Sunday after church services," Mrs. Holloway continued. "That gives you 3 days to rest from your journey and prepare." They arrived at the town's only hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch. As they entered the lobby, several women sitting in a corner fell silent, their eyes fixed on Charlotte. "That's her," one whispered loudly enough to be heard. "The mail-order bride for Robert Sawyer." "Lord have mercy," another said. "Did you see her face?" Charlotte stiffened but kept her head high as she followed Mrs. Holloway to the front desk. "Don't mind them," the older woman muttered. "Small towns breed small minds." After settling into her modest room, Charlotte sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. Perhaps she should have stayed in Boston, enduring the pitying looks from her family and the rejection from suitors who couldn't see past her scars. The next morning, Charlotte ventured downstairs for breakfast. The dining room fell quiet when she entered, and she felt the weight of stairs as she took a seat at a small table in the corner. "Well, if it isn't Mr. Sawyer's mail-order surprise," a voice said loudly. Charlotte looked up to see a handsome woman in an expensive dress approaching her table. Her blonde hair was elaborately styled and her lips were curled in a cruel smile. "I'm Vivian Palmer," the woman said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've known Robert Sawyer for years. We all expected him to propose to me eventually." She leaned closer. "I wonder what he'll think when he sees what he's paid for. A damaged good." Charlotte's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to meet Vivian's gaze. "I believe that's between Mr. Sawyer and myself, Miss Palmer," Vivian laughed. "Oh, honey. Robert wants a pretty wife to show off, not someone to hide away. This town already has enough tragedy without adding yours to it." As Vivian sauntered away, Charlotte noticed a tall man standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his Stetson hat. He'd clearly overheard the exchange, and for a moment their eyes met. Then he turned and walked out, Charlotte spent the day in her room, sewing finishing touches on her wedding dress. It was a simple affair of pale blue cotton, the best she could afford. That evening, a knock at her door revealed Mrs. Holloway bearing an invitation. "Mr. Sawyer has requested your company for dinner tomorrow night," she announced. "He wishes to meet you before the wedding." Charlotte's stomach knotted with anxiety. I should tell him about my face before we meet." Mrs. Holloway patted her hand. "Dear, I've already told him. Robert Sawyer isn't the type to be bothered by such things." But Charlotte knew better. Even the kindest men had turned away from her after seeing her scars. The next evening, Charlotte dressed with care, arranging her hair to partially cover the right side of her face. Her hands trembled as she pinned a small cameo brooch to her collar, her mother's parting gift. Mrs. Holloway escorted her to the town's only restaurant, a surprisingly well-appointed establishment attached to the hotel. As they entered, Charlotte immediately saw Robert Sawyer standing near the bar. He was the same man she'd noticed in the doorway the previous day. He was taller than she'd expected, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked the land. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the distance. His hair was dark brown, and he wore it longer than was fashionable back east. Mrs. Holloway made the introductions and then discreetly departed, leaving Charlotte alone with her future husband. "Miss Norwood," Robert said, his voice deep and steady. "It's good to finally meet you." "Mr. Sawyer," Charlotte replied, keeping her head slightly turned to hide her scars. "Thank you for the invitation." They were seated at a corner table, and after ordering, an awkward silence fell between them. Charlotte could feel his eyes on her, and she focused on the tablecloth, tracing its pattern with her finger. "You've come a long way," he finally said. "Boston to Montana is quite a journey for a woman alone." "I'm not afraid of difficult journeys, Mr. Sawyer," he nodded slowly. "I gathered that from your letters. You write well. Educated?" "Yes. My father was a professor before he passed. He believed his daughters should be as well educated as his sons." Their conversation progressed haltingly through dinner. Robert spoke of his ranch, the cattle drive he'd just completed, and his plans to expand his property. Charlotte shared stories of Boston and her journey west, but all the while she kept her face partially turned away, and she noticed he never moved to position himself to see her fully. As they finished their meal, a group of cowboys entered the restaurant, loudly celebrating the end of a cattle drive. One of them spotted Robert and called out to him, "Sawyer, come join us for a drink." Robert raised a hand in acknowledgement but declined. The cowboys approached anyway, their curiosity about Charlotte evident. "So this is your mail-order bride," said the tallest one, his eyes roving over Charlotte. When she turned slightly to reach for her water glass, exposing her scarred profile, his expression changed. "Jesus, Sawyer." "Didn't they send a picture first?" Charlotte froze, her hand still on the glass. "That's enough, Davis," Robert said, his voice carrying a warning, but another cowboy chimed in. "Hell, I'd ask for my money back. What happened to her face anyway?" Charlotte stood abruptly, her napkin falling to the floor. "Excuse me," she whispered, then fled the restaurant, ignoring Robert's call to wait. She ran blindly down the street, tears blurring her vision until she reached the small garden behind the hotel. There, in the gathering darkness, she finally let her tears fall freely. She had been a fool to think things would be different here, that she could escape the cruelty and stares. "Miss Norwood." She turned to find Robert standing a few feet away, his expression difficult to read in the dim light from the hotel windows. "I apologize for my behavior," she said stiffly, "and for the scene." "You have nothing to apologize for," he replied, stepping closer. "Those men were out of line." Charlotte gave a bitter laugh. But they spoke the truth, didn't they? You didn't know what you were getting when you agreed to marry me. I should have been more forthright in my letters. Robert was silent for a long moment. May I ask what happened? A fire, she said simply. 5 years ago. Our house caught fire in the night. My brother was trapped in his bedroom. I went in after him. She touched her cheek unconsciously. The doctors said I was lucky. It could have been worse. Your brother, he survived, thanks to God's mercy. Robert nodded slowly. Miss Norwood, I believe we should postpone the wedding. Though she had expected it, the words still stung. Charlotte blinked back fresh tears and nodded. Of course. I understand completely. I'll make arrangements to return east on tomorrow's train. That's not what I meant, he said quietly. I think we should take some time to get to know each other better before we make such a commitment. Perhaps a month. Charlotte stared at him in confusion. You still wish to marry me? Robert stepped closer, and for the first time, he directly faced the scarred side of her face. His gaze was steady, unflinching. I came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and a dream of building something meaningful. Every success I've had has come through perseverance and hard work. I recognize those qualities in you, Miss Norwood. Your letters spoke of a woman of intelligence, courage, and determination. Nothing I've seen tonight contradicts that impression. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest. Mr. Sawyer, I don't want your pity. And I don't offer it, he replied firmly. What I offer is respect and the chance for us to build something together. If you're still willing. The next morning, Charlotte moved from the hotel to the small guest house on the Sawyer ranch. Mrs. Holloway had arranged for a chaperone, a widowed ranch hand's sister named Mrs. Baxter, to stay with her until the wedding. The ranch was larger than Charlotte had imagined, with a handsome 2-story main house built of sturdy pine logs, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A creek ran along the eastern edge of the property, and mountains rose in the distance. Over the following days, Charlotte began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Mrs. Baxter with cooking for the ranch hands, tended the vegetable garden, and explored the property. Robert was often busy with ranch work, but each evening they would sit on the porch and talk as the sun set. She learned that he had come west from Pennsylvania after the Civil War, seeking a fresh start. He'd worked as a cowhand for several years before saving enough to buy his own small parcel of land. Through hard work and smart decisions, he'd built the Circle S Ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. Why did you advertise for a wife? She asked him one evening, a week after her arrival. A successful man like yourself could surely find a local woman to marry. Robert was silent for a moment, his gaze on the distant mountains. I tried that route. Found that most women here were interested in my property and position, not in me. And you thought an Eastern woman would be different? He smiled slightly. I thought a woman willing to travel across the country to marry a stranger might value courage and determination over appearances and social standing. They were interrupted by the arrival of a ranch hand with an urgent matter requiring Robert's attention, but his words stayed with Charlotte long after he'd gone. As the days passed, Charlotte found herself settling into life at the ranch. The hands were initially wary of her, but her willingness to work hard and her kindness gradually won them over. She began riding with Robert in the mornings, exploring the vast property and learning about cattle ranching. 2 weeks after her arrival, disaster struck. A sudden summer storm blew in from the mountains, bringing lightning that sparked a fire in the north pasture. The ranch hands scrambled to fight the flames and move the cattle to safety. Charlotte worked alongside everyone else, filling buckets from the creek and passing them down a line of men. When she heard that 2 calves were trapped in a burning section of fence, she didn't hesitate. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed a horse blanket, soaked it in the creek, and ran toward the flames. The heat was intense, bringing back terrifying memories of that night 5 years ago, but Charlotte pushed through her fear. She found the calves huddled against the burning fence and managed to wrap the wet blanket around herself and coax them to follow her out of danger. When she emerged from the smoke, Robert was there, his face pale with fear. "Charlotte, what were you thinking?" she coughed, her face streaked with soot. "I couldn't let them die." For a moment he just stared at her. Then, in front of all the ranch hands, he pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he whispered against her hair. That night, after the fire had been contained and the damage assessed, Charlotte sat in the guest house kitchen as Mrs. Baxter applied a soothing salve to her hands, which were red and blistered from the heat. "Mr. Sawyer was beside himself when he realized where you'd gone," the older woman remarked. "I've never seen him so frightened." Charlotte looked up in surprise. "Frightened?" Mrs. Baxter nodded. "That man cares for you, Miss Norwood, more than he lets on." The next morning, Charlotte found a small bundle on the porch of the guest house. Inside was a book of poetry, Tennyson, her favorite, with a note from Robert. "For the bravest woman I know." Later that day, as she helped in the vegetable garden, she heard the sound of horses approaching. Looking up, she saw Vivian Palmer riding toward the main house, accompanied by one of the cowboys who had mocked Charlotte at the restaurant. Charlotte watched as Robert emerged from the barn to greet them. Though she couldn't hear their conversation, it was clear from Vivian's animated gestures and frequent glances toward the guest house that Charlotte was the topic of discussion. That evening, Robert was quiet during their usual porch conversation. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. "I saw Miss Palmer visit today." Robert nodded, his expression grim. "She came to warn me. About me. She seems to think I'm being deceived or coerced into this marriage." He shook his head in disgust. "Vivian has always had a talent for causing trouble." Charlotte's fingers twisted in her lap. "Perhaps she's right to be concerned. You hardly know me." Robert turned to look at her directly. "I know enough. I know you're intelligent, kind, and braver than anyone I've ever met. I know you value family and aren't afraid of hard work." His voice softened. "And I know that every day I spend with you makes me more certain that advertising for a bride was the best decision I ever made." Charlotte's heart raced at his words, but doubt still lingered. "Robert, I need to be sure you understand what you're getting. These scars won't fade. This is my face, for better or worse." In the fading light, he reached out slowly, telegraphing his movements. His calloused fingers gently touched her cheek, tracing the path of the scars from her temple to her jaw. It was the first time anyone besides a doctor had willingly touched her scarred skin. "You're perfect," he said softly. "These marks are proof of your courage and love. How could I see them as anything but beautiful?" Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes at his words. For the first time in 5 years, she felt truly seen. The next Sunday, 3 weeks after Charlotte's arrival in Whiteridge, she and Robert attended church services together. As they walked into the small white clapboard building, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to them. Charlotte held her head high, no longer trying to hide her scars behind her hair. Robert's hand was warm and steady at the small of her back as he guided her to a pew near the front. As the congregation sang hymns, Charlotte noticed Vivian Palmer watching them from across the aisle, her expression sour. But when Robert's deep voice joined Charlotte's in singing "Amazing Grace," she found she didn't care what anyone else thought. After the service, as they stood in the churchyard, the pastor approached them. "Mr. Sawyer, Miss Norwood, I understand you're planning to wed." "Yes, Reverend," Robert confirmed. "We'd like to set a date." "Wonderful," the pastor smiled. The usual period of acquaintance is 3 months for those who meet through correspondence. Before Robert could respond, Charlotte spoke up. "Reverend, we were hoping to marry sooner, perhaps next Sunday." Robert looked at her in surprise, but there was pleasure in his eyes. The pastor seemed uncertain. "That's quite rushed, Miss Norwood. Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied, meeting Robert's gaze. As they rode back to the ranch, Robert asked, "Are you sure about this, Charlotte? We can wait if you need more time." Charlotte smiled. "I came west to find a new beginning. I think I've found it, Robert, unless you have doubts." He shook his head. "No doubts, not a single one." The week leading up to the wedding was a flurry of activity. The women from neighboring ranches came to help with preparations, bringing food and decorations. Even some of the townspeople who had initially been cool toward Charlotte showed up to offer assistance. The evening before the wedding, Robert invited Charlotte to ride with him to a spot on the property she hadn't yet seen. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing a gentle slope, until they reached a clearing on a hillside overlooking the entire ranch. "This is my favorite place," Robert said as they dismounted. "When I first bought the land, I would come up here to plan what I wanted to build." The view was breathtaking. The ranch buildings looked like toys from this height, and beyond them, the vast Montana landscape stretched to the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed. Robert took her hand. "I wanted to show you something." He led her to where a foundation had been laid for a small structure. "I started building this last year, a place to come and think away from the main house." Charlotte walked around the stone foundation. "What will it be?" "That depends on you," he said. "It could be a writing cabin or a studio or just a retreat, whatever you want it to be." She looked at him in surprise. "For me," he nodded, "I want you to have a space that's yours alone, somewhere you can pursue your own interests and dreams." Charlotte was deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Robert. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be happy here," he replied simply. "That's all I want." As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across the land, Robert pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have something else for you, a proper proposal this time." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond. "Charlotte Norwood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Not because of an advertisement or agreement, but because I've come to care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time." Tears blurred Charlotte's vision as she nodded. "Yes, Robert, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gently cupped her face in his hands, his fingers warm against both her smooth and scarred skin. When he kissed her, Charlotte felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Baxter helped Charlotte dress in her blue wedding gown, now embellished with lace contributed by the neighboring ranchers' wives. "You make a beautiful bride," Mrs. Baxter said, arranging Charlotte's hair in a simple but elegant style that framed her face without hiding it. The ceremony was held on the ranch, under a canopy of trees near the creek. Nearly everyone from town and the surrounding ranches attended, their curiosity about the mail-order bride with the scarred face overcome by the obvious happiness of the couple. As Charlotte walked toward Robert, who waited for her beneath an arch of wildflowers, she saw Vivian Palmer standing at the back of the gathering, her expression unreadable. But Charlotte's focus quickly returned to Robert, whose eyes never left her face as she approached. The pastor spoke of commitment, partnership, and love that endures through hardship. When it came time for the vows, Robert's voice was steady and sure. "I, Robert, take you, Charlotte, to be my wife. I promise to stand by you in good times and bad, to respect and honor you, to work alongside you in building our life together, and to love you faithfully for all the days of my life." Charlotte's voice trembled slightly as she repeated her own vows, emotion making it difficult to speak. When Robert slipped the gold band onto her finger to join the engagement ring, his hands were gentle and sure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "Mr. Sawyer, you may kiss your bride." Robert's kiss was tender and reverent, his hands cradling her face as if she were made of precious glass. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Sawyer, the applause was genuine and warm. The celebration continued well into the evening with food, music, and dancing under the stars. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. During a moment of quiet, Charlotte found herself approached by Vivian Palmer. "Mrs. Sawyer," Vivian said stiffly. "Miss Palmer," Charlotte replied, bracing herself. Vivian seemed to struggle with her words. "I misjudged you," she finally said. "And Robert, I thought." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I wish you both happiness." Before Charlotte could respond, Vivian walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Robert appeared at Charlotte's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything all right?" he asked, nodding toward Vivian's retreating figure. Charlotte smiled. "Yes, I think it is." As the evening progressed, Charlotte found herself watching her new husband interact with their guests. He was respected by the men and admired by the women, but his eyes always sought her out across the gathering, as if to reassure himself she was still there. Later, when the guests had departed and they were finally alone in the main house, their home now, Robert stood before her in their bedroom, his expression suddenly uncertain. "Charlotte, I want you to know that I don't expect. That is, I understand if you need time to." She silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "Robert Sawyer, are you nervous?" A sheepish smile crossed his face. "Maybe a little." Charlotte took his hand and placed it against her scarred cheek. "You once told me these scars were beautiful because of what they represented. Tonight, I want to believe that." His eyes darkened with emotion. "You are beautiful, Charlotte, every part of you." Their first night together as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a perfect culmination of the trust and affection that had grown between them. In Robert's arms, Charlotte felt not only desired but treasured, her scars no longer a barrier but simply another part of her that he embraced. As dawn broke over the Montana landscape, Charlotte lay awake in their bed, watching the first light illuminate her husband's sleeping face. The journey that had brought her west had been born of desperation and hope that somewhere, someone might see beyond her scars to the woman beneath. In Robert, she had found not just acceptance but admiration, not just companionship but love. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, the sounds of men preparing for the day's work drifting through the open window. This was her home now, and these people her family. Here, 1,000 miles from where she started, Charlotte Sawyer had finally found where she belonged. Robert stirred beside her, his eyes opening to find her watching him. He smiled, reaching up to trace the line of her jaw, his fingers gentle against both smooth and scarred skin. "Good morning, Mrs. Sawyer," he murmured. "Good morning, husband," she replied, her heart full. 5 years later, the Circle S Ranch had nearly doubled in size. The main house had been expanded to accommodate a growing family. Charlotte had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, the previous spring. The small foundation on the hillside had become a charming cabin, where Charlotte wrote stories of frontier life that were published in Eastern newspapers and magazines. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Robert took Charlotte back to the hillside cabin. As they stood on the porch watching their children play in the meadow below, supervised by Mrs. Baxter, Robert wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked, his chin resting on her shoulder. Charlotte turned in his embrace, her face scars and all fully visible in the bright Montana sunshine. "Not a single one," she said, and kissed him beneath the vast western sky that had brought them together.